The fifth perspective we also find in this country is very popularly the comparative study. Now, it is most easy and as well as most difficult to go for a comparative study. You can compare Shankaracharya with Kant. You can compare Shankara with Ramanujan. You can compare Shankara with Plato. So you pick up any philosopher or you pick up two distinct texts and you compare them. You can also compare one philosopher through different phases of the philosopher's articulation. For instance, in contemporary Western philosophy, yet again another very popular theme for PhD research is a comparison between early and later Wittgenstein or early and later Sartre. So this looking at two sets of points, of ideas, and try to compare them is a very popular exercise. Then we need to see what is this comparison going to bring. It is understandable when you compare early Sartre with later Sartre or early Wittgenstein with later Wittgenstein. You want to draw an answer to the question whether Wittgenstein shifted his ideas towards the end of his career, end of his life. Same is the case with Sartre, whether he shifted his position. One thing is very clear, that this very question, whether this philosopher shifted his ideas, acknowledges that we are always a historical being. We live in space and time. So our ideas also evolve. So the question is whether the ideas have changed in a philosopher or ideas have remained constant in a philosopher. This is a very meaningful exercise. But when you compare, for instance, Buddhism with existentialism, a particular classical concept of Buddhism with a 20th century concept of existentialism, because often we take becoming as a common point for comparison. So then we need to go through seriously what is such research going to help us with. So primarily what I am submitting for your consideration is that when we raise certain research questions, those questions should be of relevance to us. Those questions are questions that bothers us. It should not be just merely a comparison for the sake of comparison. I will not go further on to this. I will move to the other perspective, which is an issue-based perspective. And I must tell you that this is the most challenging task, and we often try to avoid doing this. Let me also explain from my own experience that when I guide my students at the MPhil level, I tell them to pick up a text or a philosopher so that you train the student to learn how seriously a philosopher has been engaging. And that can be done only when you track down the works of the philosopher, or you focus on a particular text and see the richness and the depth through which philosophizing is done in the text, with the hope that the students over a period of time after his MPhil, when he goes to the PhD, would like to follow the same rigor, same seriousness in raising his own issues and challenge questions in PhD. But unfortunately, most often what happens is that we get so bogged down, we get so influenced, mesmerized by a philosophical text or a philosopher, that after MPhil, the student says, I want to continue with the same philosopher. Like the students is working on Husserl, and the whole idea was after you complete your MPhil on Husserl, you move to issue-based research in PhD with a training on how seriously Husserl has worked out. But the students wants to continue with the works of the philosopher because so rich are the works of these philosophers that you cannot, what you call, detach yourself from the issues and challenges that the philosopher has been engaging with. But my submission is that since most of us are teachers in academic institutions, we should encourage our students to pick up issue-based research. Because unless the student pick up his or her own philosophical problems, we continue doing with the problems of the great philosophers or others. No matter how great those philosophers be, they are the others. If the problems faced by those great philosophers are also problems of me, I have no issues. But just because we are mesmerized by the problems and issues raised by those philosophers, it is unfair, it will be sad affair if we stop looking at our own issues and problems. So this issue-based research or issue-based perspective is something that we must encourage our students. I will just give one or two examples before I move to the second set of talk that I wish to pick up. What will be contemporary Indian philosophy? What will be the nature of contemporary Indian philosophy? This could be a very challenging philosophical problem. How do we say contemporary Indian philosophy? Now this is a very simple question, but the answer hard to find. It requires enormous work. Are we going to debunk the classical Indian philosophy? As I said, 6 plus 3, but there could be many more. When we talk of contemporary Indian philosophy, is not Nyaya philosophy still continuing? Is not classical philosophy still continuing? If we presume that classical is somewhere left out before the British came, and after the coming of the British, philosophy has shifted in a different discourse, I think we are mistaken. Lots of work has been going on in philosophy, in the traditional classical Indian philosophy. And those are going on still the present time. So what will we call such philosophers or philosophizing? Will we call them contemporary Indian philosophy or classical Indian philosophy? What will Indian philosophy comprise of? Will this be only done by philosophers residing in India or people of Indian origin? So this also is a question worth asking. What will be the Indian philosophy, contemporary? Or those who do contemporary Indian philosophy, are they doing more of Western philosophy in methodology? If we start reading Indian philosophy from, say, a completely different methodologies, borrowing from the West, are we going to call those contemporary Indian philosophy or not? I do not give an answer at the moment. I am raising only questions that this is also a challenge that we can pick up as an issue-based research that we can do. Perhaps another example I will give, which I myself am pursuing at the moment. When we talk of Indian aesthetics, immediately we go by Bharata's Natya Shastra and the Rasa theory. Then you have Dhanalok and others, Dhvani theory, which is absolutely fine. And there is a chain of rich tradition in this classical Indian aesthetics. But we have completely ignored many other aesthetic traditions in this country. And that is something worth investigating. Take the concept of Tennai in Sangam literature, in the classical Tamil literature, and which is fairly old as the Vedic time. The idea of aesthetic sensibility driven out of the geography or landscape and getting blended with interiority of human sensibility is something worth investigating. And this, to the best of my knowledge, has not been pursued among the philosophy circle. Maybe some works are being done by those who are in theatre on working on aesthetics from art criticisms and so on. But as far as I know, philosophy departments and the philosophers, academic philosophers, have not pursued beyond the rasa theory when we talk of classical Indian aesthetics. This is not to demean the rasa theory. I acknowledge the richness, but also to submit before you that Indian tradition is so vast, not to be confined to only one conception. That is, with that I would like to end up my first discourse on perspective-based research. The second one, which I will quickly do, is on the ways through which we have been philosophizing in this country, and what we may call methodology or methods. Even here, you might take the word methodology and methods equivalent, but I must also submit that these words carry different meanings in different disciplines. Let me illustrate this point. If you look at social theorizing or discuss with any sociologist, methodology is a larger framework within which method is a part. Whereas if you look and discuss with the historians, what you call methodology in sociology is used as methods in history writing. I will not go into that. This is a kind of nomenclature that different disciplines use different terms to mean the same thing. So I am using this word methods in the most broad as well as in the most specific sense. Broad in the sense it could also be equated with the word methodology as used in social theorizing, in sociology for instance. But I will also use the word methods with the specific steps that we take up in the course of philosophizing. That is how I am using the method interchangeably in the most broadest possible way. The most popular method of philosophizing in this country, call it thanks to colonialism, is conceptual analysis. And we owe it, whether you like it or not, to analytic traditions. And this analytic traditions also comes through colonial education. Had the British not come to this country, I am not sure the kind of popularity that analytic philosophy has gained in this country, perhaps it would not have had. I am open to debate on this. But the fact remains that philosophy is the study and analyzing of the concepts that we use. And I have said in the first half of my lecture that the subject matter of philosophy is primarily ideas, the concepts. So it is not the physical world per se directly, but ideas that is linked with the physical world. That is the subject matter of philosophy. So we analyze these concepts which we use to make sense of the world, and that is where philosophy's job comes. So most of the researches that we do is of analyzing these ideas, the concepts, and along with that the narrative or theories that comes with these concepts, because concepts don't stand alone. The concepts are linked with one another and narratives are made, what we call theorizing. And we try to analyze, narrate, explain through theories these concepts. Now, I would like to bring here for your consideration a debate, popular at one point, not so popular perhaps now, is how should philosophy be understood? Should we call it as darsana or something else? We know that philosophy, when it is used in Indian language, in the classical Indian language Sanskrit, the word darsana is being used. And the etymological meaning of darsana is not about perception. It is not about seeing. But darsana implies seeing through, seeing beyond what is being perceived. In other words, it is not about seeing and knowing, but it is about understanding. What I call seeing through is about understanding. And this is also being done. This issue has been discussed by Martin Heidegger in his Being and Time on knowledge and understanding, knowing and understanding. Now let me bring to your notice the work by Wilhelm Hoffast, who wrote and argued that darsana, the Sanskrit word, is not appropriate to understand or not appropriate to equate with the word philosophy as is being understood in the West. Because in the West, philosophy is understood more as an exercise of reasoning, conceptualization, conceptual analysis. So, philosophy as analysis is not reflected in the word darsana. So, the word anviksiki, which is equally old as Kautilya's Arthasastra, which has been used in Arthasastra, which has been used in Sankhya, even in the Lokayat and Nyaya. So this word has been proposed by Wilhelm Hoffast, and many Indian scholars, philosophers like Professor Dayakrishna and others, who jumped gun onto this and said that darsana should not be the appropriate word, it should be replaced by anviksiki. Why I brought this debate is that this attempt to change the concept, the word darsana with anviksiki, is primarily with a motive to see philosophy as conceptual analysis, an exercise of reasoning. But we have failed to ask, even the Wilhelm Hoffast failed to ask the etymological meaning of philosophy. We know philosophy comes from the Greek word philosophia, the love for wisdom. While half-fast argued that darsana does not suffice the meaning of reasoning and the conceptual analysis, so anvikshiki should be brought in as an alternative Sanskrit term, which I am not against per se, but Half-Fast himself failed to look at philosophy, the etymological meaning of philosophy. The point is, the philosophy, the word, has moved its connotation from early Greek time to the present time, and connotation has changed. Whereas in Indian tradition, Swami Vivekananda was one who propounded that the darshan shastra, the philosophy, must include largely the method of spirituality and intuition. And this was something Half-Fast and others has been critiquing, that Indian philosophy is largely spiritual and religious in nature. And unless you remove the word darsana with anvikshiki, that the fervor of philosophy as conceptual analysis will get lost. So that was one argument. I will not go further due to limitation of time. But philosophy is not merely, now the counterpoint I want to submit is that philosophy is not merely about conceptual analysis, but about description, about narration. So describing a storytelling could also be a way of philosophizing. And I will quickly go, without delivering further, that very idea of, Apollonian and Dionysian forms of narrating, these mythical figures used as symbol and articulated by none other than what you call Friedrich Nietzsche, and taking this as a philosophical methodology, using symbols and narrating through mythology and doing philosophy, and not necessarily analyzing the concept. So description, what Heidegger has done, is also a descriptive philosophy. It's not about trying to conceptualize and explain the concepts, but to describe and narrate. Linked to this, I would still say the third one is on the experiential domain, or what you call the first person account. The philosophizing could also be an exercise of the narrative that comes from the first person. The first person existential narrative can also be a mode of philosophizing. Even storytelling can be a way of philosophizing. A cultural narrative can also give you a way of philosophizing. So you have many other methodology that comes by, like dialectical, the hermeneutical. I will not so much deal with those, because these are very well known methodology, which I am sure there will be lectures on dialectics or dialectical methodology, or hermeneutics or hermeneutical reading. But what I wish to emphasize today, that it is not merely the conceptual analysis that is considered as what you call philosophical method per se. Philosophical methods are multiple, and not following one does not imply that you are not doing philosophy. And I am submitting that going to the cultural narrative, narration as a mode of philosophizing, storytelling as a mode of philosophizing should be taken seriously. And very little has been done. Much has been done on dialectics, whether it is about Socratic, Platonic dialectics, or Marxian, Hegelian dialectics, or you go to hermeneutics, you have lots, either it is on Paul Ricoeur or Gadamer and many others who have worked on this. So these are very well known philosophical methods. But a particular method which we must try, and we should not shy away, is descriptive or storytelling or narrative account, and this has been done by Paul Ricoeur to some extent. But I will go further to say that the cultural narratives of myth and symbols, dissecting them, looking at those narratives and symbols, could also be a way of philosophizing, and that is very important. Now, for instance, I will end up with this one small story that comes from the story from Northeast India. Our Naga community of Nagaland, when they go for their creation myth, they believe that they come from originally Nung Terok, which means 6 stones. There are still 6 very big stones, which is quite visible distinctly, and they believe that they have come from the stones. Now the beauty is the life coming out of the non-life, the animate coming out of the inanimate, is even the myth creates such an exciting, interesting narrative that the division between the animate and inanimate becomes blurred through this creation myth. Further, this myth also says these 6 stones are 3 males and 3 females. The inanimates are also gendered. Now this ethnic or indigenous narrative, what many calls also a tribal narrative, I fall short of calling it tribal because tribal is a very colonial category. So I would say that this indigenous narrative, one might completely throw it away saying that creation myth has nothing to do with philosophy. But if philosophy is also about making sense of the world, then look at the way the humans, the animate, tries to link with the inanimate part of his own world. How he links his origin to the inanimate, and how you make the inanimate alive through the narrative, through imaginations. And that is the beauty of philosophy. And philosophy must also include such forms of philosophizing, which has been done very little in this country. Thank you very much.